Today's video is about informal letter writing. It is one of the write-in tasks for Unit 3 WJEC GCSE English Language. In an exam condition, you will have 1 hour to complete this task, and we're expecting around 750 words, about 2 sides of A4, perhaps tipping onto 3 depending on the size of your individual handwriting. So just as a reminder then, the writing tasks for Unit 3 fall under the umbrella of these 3 types of writings. We've got persuasion, argumentation and instructional writing. Now you use these sort of tones and purposes to write via presenting a different text type in your exam. So some of the text types that you need to know about are speeches. You need to be able to write a review. Perhaps you might be asked to write a report or a leaflet, a letter that we're looking at in this video, or an article. Now sometimes these words won't be visible in the rhetoric of your instruction. You might have something like write an extract for a travel magazine. Now that is testing your knowledge as to what an extract in a travel magazine would look like. And what sort of tone and language would be used, and of course the clue here is magazine, and of course magazines are made up of articles, so that is asking you to write an article. So in an exam condition, don't panic if you don't see one of these text types, just think logically about what they're asking you to do. Letter writing then. So the question for letter writing will almost certainly start with write a letter. It won't tell you, however, whether this letter needs to be formal or informal. Now this is something that you have to deduce for yourself. So we're going to use PAFT to decide whether a letter is formal or informal. You have to make this decision before you start writing. There are different expected features, the layout is different, so before you start writing, before you even start planning what you're going to say, you need to know whether it's formal or informal. So as always then, PAFT stands for purpose, audience, format and tone. And these are the 4 indicators as to what type of letter we are going to write. So the purpose, why are you writing it? Are you writing a job application? Are you writing a letter of complaint? Or is it a letter of thanks to somebody you know? Are you planning a trip with a friend? So the purpose is again going to be a key indicator as to whether your letter should be formal or informal. Another really integral component to this decision is who you are writing it for. Now they will always tell you who your audience is, and you need to know, based on who the audience is, whether you should write formally or informally. So are you writing to a friend or a relative? Are you writing to a peer, somebody who's the same age as you? Or are you writing to someone in a position of authority? Are they older than you? Have you ever met this person before? Are you expected to know who this person is? Of course, the aforementioned things will really affect whether your letter is formal or informal. Your format then, obviously it's a letter, but you need to know what the features are of formal versus informal letters, something that we will explore a little bit later on. And then your tone, the key element that you are being assessed on. Can you adapt your writing to suit the key parts of PAFT? Is it appropriate to use humour or not? Are you talking about a really serious topic and therefore need to write in quite a sombre way? Should your writing be lively and entertaining and funny if you're writing perhaps for a younger person or a peer, or the purpose is to give encouragement perhaps? So the language choices that you are going to make and the references that you are going to make within your writing are hugely dependent on why you are writing it and who you are writing it to. Here are some section B example letter tasks then, and we're going to explore whether these would be formal or informal and what has driven that decision to be made. Here's the first example then. So this instruction says, write a letter to your local MP persuading them to invest in youth services for your area. So just want you to think to yourself whether you think this would be formal or informal, and think about why you have come to that decision. So I would say this needs to be a formal letter then. So you're writing to your local MP, so there is no implication here that you should know this person or have any prior relationship with them. They're presumably not the same age as you. You are writing to them in a formal capacity. You are writing to them as part of their job, in their role as an MP. They're in a position of authority, they have power over local areas, and of course it's quite a serious topic, youth services in your area. Lots of the things you might be talking about as to why you need youth services might be very serious and very sombre, and that needs to be reflected in the tone that you use. So this instance, you would have to write a formal letter. Here's another example then. It says, write a letter to a friend who is thinking of participating in a sponsored run with their college. Offer them some words of encouragement. So if we think about PAFT then, so the purpose is to be encouraging and to encourage a friend to participate in a charity event. So it's going to be lively, it's going to be very upbeat. If we think about audience, we're told we're writing to a friend, and there's this suggestion that the friend is the same age as you because it mentions college. So this then is going to be an informal letter. So you know this person, it suggests that if you're a friend you have a prior relationship with them, and as I just mentioned, it suggested they are the same age as you. So you don't need the same level of formality as we would if we were writing to an adult in a position of power. This example then, so you recently returned from staying with family, write them a letter of thanks. So again, thinking about purpose, audience, format and tone. This would need to be an informal letter, and here is why. Of course, if they're your family, you have a relationship with them, as it implies you recently stayed with them, you have obviously recently spent time with them, and again you are writing a letter of thanks, so it should be a lively, grateful, upbeat tone. You would refer to the experiences you've had together, you might refer to other family members. All of these things will show the exam board that you know exactly how to show that your letter is informal. Here's another example then, so think about whether this would be formal or informal. So it says, you wish to volunteer with a local charity. Write them a letter outlining what you could offer them. So here then we're writing to people we don't know. They're a charity. It's part of their job, so they're in a position of authority in this instance. And it's a little bit like a letter of application. You are outlining your attributes and all of your experience that would help you to have this role. You're trying to persuade them to employ you, or at least to let you volunteer. So you don't know who you are writing to, and it is an official letter as it says there, and of course you're also trying to impress them so that they let you join them. Okay, so this would have to be a formal letter. And let's have a look at this example then. It says, you've had a terrible experience at a restaurant. Write them a letter of complaint. Again, you're writing to somebody at their workplace, you don't know this person, you don't have a personal relationship with the company. You would have to make up what this terrible experience was and what made it, caused you to write this letter of complaint. So this would be a formal letter, you'd write formally, you would outline the events of the night in a formal way and talk about how disappointed you were and how it goes against the expectations that you had of the restaurant. And as I mentioned earlier, it is a business, so you're writing to somebody in their capacity as their role within the restaurant, so it would have to be a formal letter. And this one then, it says, your young neighbour is about to begin secondary school. Write them a letter of advice. So think to yourself whether you think this should be formal or informal. I would say then this needs to be informal, so let's have a look at why. We're told our audience is a neighbour, so although you might not know your neighbours personally, it is implied that if someone is a neighbour, you'd have some sort of prior relationship with them, prior experience of talking to them. The fact that you're told your neighbour is young start in secondary school, so around 11 years old. You would obviously write informally. You try to engage them with perhaps humour, relevant cultural references. Obviously, you're still trying to hit the mark scheme, so you'd have to use, complex punctuation and ambitious vocabulary, but, they're not 5 years old, they are 11, they're educated, they're old enough to read and things like that, so you would have to make sure you hit the mark scheme. But again, you would write informally, you could talk about your own experiences of school and trying to sort of cajole them into looking forward to join in secondary school, or perhaps the things that they would have to look out for. So they were some examples then of the type of task that you might be set where you have to write a letter, and as you can see, they do not tell you whether you have to write a formal or an informal letter. That is something that you have to work out for yourself. Okay, really important then, the layout of an informal letter. You might want to screenshot this, keep it safe for revision purposes. So you would be expected to lay out an informal letter correctly on the page. So let's explore this then. So on the right hand side, we've got your address. Now, one of the most commonly asked questions I get is, what address do I use? Do I have to put my address? Of course you don't, Year 11. You can make up any address that you like. It doesn't have to be a real address. No one is checking. All you have to do is use the conventional features of an address. So for example, if we have a look at the top line there, One Station Road, I've got no idea whether that road really exists or not. We've got the house number first and then the road name. You can make up any number, any road name that you like. Number 2, Thomas Street. 45, Stewart Street. Number 10, Dumfries Lane. Okay, it doesn't matter as long as it follows that format. You then have the local area, so the town that it's in. Here I've put Pontardawe. You could make up a town or mention whatever town you like. You then tend to have the wider area or the nearest city. Okay, making sure we capitalise places, of course. And then we have a postcode. You do need to know the conventions of a postcode, so a mix of letters and numbers. The letters are capitalised, so if you didn't capitalise them, you would pick that up as an error because a postcode always has capitalised letters. Now, just as a side note, you might see addresses sometimes written with commas at the end of each row. So One Station Road, comma, Pontardawe, comma, and so on. I have never seen that punctuation being used in an example from the WJEC for GCSE English language. So you might see that, I don't know, in revision guides and on the internet, but personally I'm not advising you to do it that way, as I have never seen that be taught. But if you ever see it with commas at the end, it's not a mistake. You can punctuate in that way, but I don't think that it's necessary personally, as it's never been in any guidance from the exam board. Really important then that we have this slanted appearance, as you can see from the arrow there. Try if you can to make sure that the house number and road name is the longest part. You might want to come up with a longer name just so it's easier to lay out on the page. We then miss a line, really important. Again, that's an expected feature, you miss the line. You then write the date in full, so the day, the date, the number of the day, and then the month. Do not write it numerically, it has to be written out in full. We then don't miss a line, but we do come on to the next line down, and we come over to the left-hand side of the page as far as we can go. So we're moving over to the left now, and you might notice already that unlike a formal letter, you do not need the recipient's address on an informal letter. We start in an informal way, so we're not saying sir, madam, or to whom it may concern here. We're using a friendly greeting, mum or Sammy, perhaps some sort of nickname. I've started with dear. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but you could say hi or hello. Just starting in an informal way is the point to take away from that. We then come down onto the next line, and as you can see, we start the first line of our letter underneath the comma from the greeting. That's really, really important. So we don't start over at the side of the page, we come under the comma. Then we start with some sort of informal greeting that shows that we know this person. So for example, I've said, "It was great to see you last week." So that shows the examiner immediately that I have a shared experience with this person, and I've used punctuation informally there to show the tone is upbeat and excited and grateful. "It was great to see you last week." So a lovely informal sort of chatty opening line. You would then of course have the body of your letter, so your paragraphs, and at the end you need an informal ending. So I've got things like "all my love," "best wishes." You could end with "see you soon," "thanks again." Just important that we're not using "yours faithfully" or "yours sincerely" for an informal letter. We have a nice, cheerful ending that shows you have a relationship with that person. Okay, you might want to pause this here if you want to read it in closer detail. I'm not going to linger on this for too long, but here we have a side-by-side comparison of a formal letter on the left and an informal letter on the right. So as you can see, the things that are noticeable immediately then are the addresses. So you have the sender's address, so your address, the person writing the letter, in both instances, perhaps with some other information on the left, the date, and then coming over to the left, for an informal letter you do not write the recipient's address, but for a formal letter you do. Then of course the way you begin your letter, so on the left, "Dear Sir, Madam, to whom it may concern," "Dear Manager," "Dear Editor," if you were writing to a newspaper, that sort of thing. So again, you might want to screenshot this for revision purposes, but I'm not going to dwell on it too long right now. Okay, the expected features then. So how can you show the examiner that you know that you are writing an informal letter, of course, apart from the layout of it? So the first thing then I've got colloquial words or expressions. Now this is using a chatty tone, changing your language and expression to show the examiner you're writing informally. Now usually I discourage this. We would never write like this in expositions, for example, definitely not in formal letters. But in informal letters we can broach into slang. So for example, "I was gobsmacked when I heard Jenny's exam results." So I've ended with an exclamation mark, again to show a cheerful, upbeat tone. Then I've used the phrase gobsmacked. Okay, it's something, an expression we would only ever use when talking, but in an informal letter, we are showing that we are writing in a conversational manner. The second one then, contractions. Now, if we don't know how to use an apostrophe to show a contraction, this can severely affect your written accuracy marks. So if you're sitting there thinking, "Oh, I'm not sure what that means," spend a little bit of time researching it and practicing, because if you're going to use contractions to show it's informal, we need to make sure that we know how to use an apostrophe to show a contraction. So for example, saying "don't" instead of "do not," "I would not" instead of "I wouldn't," things like that. Again, I would obviously usually discourage it, but in this instance, using them purposefully can show that you know that you are writing informally. Number 3 then is similar to the first one in terms of the language we're using. So cliches and idioms. So for example, "Grandad has a heart of gold," or "I'm still fit as a fiddle." So those idioms, those sort of quirky sayings that people use when they are speaking in a conversation, we can now use them in our writing. Number 4 then I think is a really clever way to show that you know you need to demonstrate a relationship with the person that you are writing to. So things like, "Remember that time we got lost in Snowdonia?" or "It wasn't as good as that last place we stayed at." Again, you are making this up, Year 11, completely made up, but you're giving a nod to the examiner to show that if you're writing particularly to a friend or family member, you've got an established relationship, you know them, and that is why you have chosen to write informally. Lastly then, a light-hearted tone. Now of course the purpose of your task is going to dictate this. You know, if you've been asked to write a letter of condolence, then obviously this probably isn't appropriate, but for the vast majority of the time this will be suitable for an informal letter. So we can use humour. If we're after the sort of star days, humour is a really good way to show that you are writing informally. And obviously using humour in writing is a skill in itself, really. Sort of demonstrating wit and sarcasm and humour through writing is quite difficult. But if you can do it, then that would be a wonderful way to show the examiner that you know you are writing in an informal way. So keeping your tone upbeat, chatty is a lovely way to show that you are writing informally. Okay, the task today then is a family member is coming to stay with you. Write them a letter outlining what activities that you have planned for them. Now, it might help you in this instance to give you more options to choose from. If we imagine that this is a post-pandemic world, or perhaps prior pandemic, you don't have to mention it in any way, shape or form, but of course it might be quite limited if we're trying to write it in sort of real life circumstances during a pandemic, but that's a choice that I'll leave up to you, okay? Now again, one of the most commonly asked questions I get is, what do I write? What do I write about? Year 11, that is what the exam board is assessing ultimately. What can you make up? Okay, that reflects your ability, Year 11. They're assessing your ability to be creative, to be original, to develop your ideas. So if you want to make up that there's a castle in the middle of Pontardawe and you're going to take your family member there, that's absolutely fine. No examiner is going to know what is in your local area. If you want to have an activity centre 10 minutes down the road, wonderful. Okay? Nobody knows if you live by the coast or if you live in the middle of a city. You are making it up, okay? Obviously you're at home, so if you do genuinely want to research what activities and places there are to go in your local area, then that is absolutely fine too. Okay then, let's use PAFT before we begin and start looking at some examples. So thinking about purpose, audience, format and tone. We should always think about these 4 things before we start any written task in your exam. So the purpose then, so it tells us that we are outlining activities, so it's an informative task. You are giving your reader information about what they're going to do. Because you're talking about activities and you're outlining what you're going to be doing, you could structure it so that each paragraph is about a different activity, but I will leave that up to you. You might want to divide your letter into days, so you could say on Monday we're going to do this, on Tuesday we're going to do this, so on and so forth. That's a stylistic choice that you need to make. We're of course told then the audience is a family member. This can be an adult family member, a family member the same age as you. It is totally at your discretion. That we are writing with a family member, so we're presuming that we know them, we've had a relationship with them, we've got previous shared experiences together. Of course then your format is a letter, that's what we're looking at today. We need to use PAFT though to decide what type of letter it's going to be. Is it going to be formal? Is it going to be informal? And then of course, based on these 3 things, we need to decide what tone we're going to use. So because it's a family member and we're excited to see them, they're coming to stay, it's going to be informal. And we're going to show that it's informal by being excited or happy for them to come. Perhaps you can include humour. Maybe you want to talk about the last time they came to stay and, I don't know, how they fell over in the sea or they dropped their Joe's ice cream. Okay, you might want to talk about previous times that they've come to stay or previous shared experiences or what places you went to visit in your childhood together, something like that. Okay, here's an extract then from an informal letter. So it's not the entirety, it's just the first part. Let's have a look then if they've followed the format of an informal letter. So if we have a look at the right hand side then, they've got the house number and the road, the local area, the sort of wider area, the city or the county, and then a postcode. And if we've got that slanted layout on the page, wonderful. They've then missed the line and they've written the date in full, wonderful. So the right hand side, that format is absolutely fine. Over on the left then we've got a nice informal greeting, dear Tommy, sort of a nickname or a really sort of friendly way to address somebody. We could have started with hello or hi, but I think dear is fine personally. We've then started our first paragraph underneath the comma after the name. How's my favourite cousin? A really nice, informal, friendly greeting, a rhetorical question. You could perhaps say favourite cousin is sort of a bit jokey. And we've got a contraction as well to show that we're writing informally straight away. So immediately I know that you know how to write informally. Then we've got idioms. Over the moon. I was over the moon when Auntie Julie told me that you'd be coming to stay. So again, this idea that we are writing in a conversational way that we would not write in an essay, for example. We've then got a reference to a family member, a shared experience. Auntie Julie told me. I'm sure we've all had experience of family members passing on messages and telling each other things. So that's showing that you are writing to a family member by referencing other family members. It's a nice way to show that you're doing that. Then again, we've got a prior childhood experience. It says, I already feel nostalgic for our childhood summers. We've got a nice ambitious word there, nostalgic, relatively hard to spell, so we're still meeting the mark scheme. Because don't forget, even though we're writing informally, it is the same mark scheme for formal and informal letters, so we need to hit that split mark scheme. We've got a cultural reference. From this letter, I think that they're writing to a family member that's a similar age to them. I know if I mentioned influencers to my grandmother, she would have no idea what I was talking about. So we've got, let's reenact some old photographs just like the influencers do. And we're using punctuation there, that exclamation mark, to show it's a really upbeat, chatty tone and a little joke, a cultural reference to indicate to the examiner that you're writing to someone who is the same age as you. Later on then, we just showing here that we've still got complex punctuation, year 11. We've got a colon, and then later on we've got dashes. There are lots of apostrophes there. There are question marks, exclamation marks. Okay, so we still need to include all of this punctuation, even though we're writing informally. And then we've got our first paragraph's an introduction, so why they're writing and they're looking forward to it. And then we've got a reference to the task at hand. So if you remember the question, you were writing to a family member, outlining the activities you have planned for them. So the first paragraph, sort of the first main body paragraph, if you like, after the introduction. I've already been planning the array of activities we're going to do. So we've got a little indication as to the purpose of the letter. Okay, so it's a lovely way to start. The rest of this letter is attached to the assignment for a lovely example of an informal letter. Okay, just a reminder then, the task is a family member is coming to stay with you. Write them a letter outlining what activities that you have planned for them. So think about PAFT before you begin. You might want to plan it out. Again, please remember you are actually being assessed on your ability to make things up, to create content. So whether or not what you write is true is absolutely irrelevant, okay? As long as it's not, let's go and see the spacecraft that landed in Ashtwen last week, okay? It has to be realistic, of course. Hopefully you've got some ideas and you know the local area well enough that you know, you could think of some activities. Of course you can travel. If you wanted to go to Cardiff or over to West Wales or Tenby, that is up to you, okay? Use your creative freedoms, Year 11. And as always, don't forget to submit your work via the assignment when you've finished. Please ask for help if you need it. You do have the internet at your disposal and plenty of time to research some things that you could write about in your letter. Maybe pull up the Unit 3 mark scheme and think about whether you're hitting that complex punctuation, ambitious vocabulary, adapting your language, style and tone to suit the audience, just to give you a reminder what you're being assessed on specifically. Good luck, don't forget to reach out if you need any extra support.